big beard, very, very, very narrow frame. And he sent me a picture of Terry Crews. And I'm like, I can't do this for a number of reasons. I can't do this because he was the whitest person I've ever met in my life. So there's a lot of things.
But like, a muscle is a muscle, isn't it? Like, it's challenging to build a muscle, any muscle. But with the right approach, you can make significant improvements.
My back. My triceps will make my back look smaller rather than my back making my triceps look bigger.
Now, all of those lifts will have to be at a certain percentage to that bench press. Now, if they're not, then you work on that specific muscle group and you improve it and you create this structural balance of percentages across those muscle groups. If you get really strong and say like at the bench press, you should be able to maintain that for about 30 days, that high-end strength.
Okay.
Power, speed, power, velocity, you can lose it in a day. So that's my excuse for my small calves.
Just quickly before we get into the full show, for any of you who's watched this podcast before, you will know that I am super passionate about this podcast and getting on the most interesting guests to help you get better results with your fat loss, your business, your life, and your coaching skills. But at the moment, 85% of you who watch this channel aren't subscribed to the channel. The bigger the channel gets, the better the guests get, the more high production value the show gets, as well as the clips get. So if you're watching this, please, can you click subscribe, like, comment, improve interaction so YouTube know we are a channel to be reckoned with. And then we can take over and then I'm coming for you, Joe Rogan. So Steve, it's been a little while. I think it's the first. Is this the first one we recorded this year or the second one we've recorded this year?
This is the first of the year.
Yeah. First of the year, right? So we had this idea of doing a few bite-sized things to help people in the new year maximize their training. So whether this is people who maybe follow Steve, we were just speaking off air how his content has been fantastic at helping people get stronger in the gym. And I've obviously been working with the coaches. So this could be something that helps your clients, or this could be something that will help literally yourself. So we're going to talk topic today about bringing up weak body parts. I think like before we actually get into the tips, like tell us a little bit about your history. What are your weaker body parts? What have been your weaker body parts and now not? And tell me your history with this topic.
Well, from a hypertrophy building muscle perspective, I would say like more of the chest area for me was always a lagging body part. I was very skinny and when I was like, I remember being 12, 13, 14, I used to have these steel dumbbells that I used to just sit there when my PS1 and PS2 were loading over those years, like the loading screen, I would sit there doing concentration curls. And I didn't learn that from the magazine. I just was doing these single arm concentration curls and hammer grip curls. So my arms actually, from all those years of just doing it, my arms are always all right. And my shoulders, I remember doing actual raises and shit. But my chest was always a lagging body part compared to the rest of me. And I had a chin up bar as well, So, one of the things I did was just train the chest properly and put more volume into it and stuff like that, hit the angles and do all that sort of stuff, the simple stuff that we'll probably go over. And then probably the calves for me as well, like most of you out there, small calf syndrome, genetic problems, isn't it?
I was about to say you're going to blame genetics on this because we all do it. We all do it, right? And we're not wrong, right? If you've got small wrists, you're not going to have big forearms no matter how much you masturbate. Yeah. And if you want big calves but you've got small ankles, you're going to struggle. But how often do you train calves?
Yeah, well, I did get some noticeable gains on them. Well, to me, they were noticeable. When I used to smash them hard, I used a lot of different techniques, a lot of different frequency plans and different methods, and I did get some growth in them. So it, obviously, like any other muscle, it can grow, innit? But saying that, where I don't do a lot of bodybuilding and specific hypertrophy on those calves anymore, they're kind of looking like they've atrophied a bit. So that's my excuse for my small calves. But a muscle is a muscle, isn't it? It's challenging to build a muscle, any muscle. But with the right approach, you can make significant improvements.
Yeah, and we'll go into this in a little bit, but it made me think about sort of how much the things that we often, before we go into all the stuff, people go, oh, I want to get bigger calves, I want to get bigger arms, I want to get bigger shoulders. And yet, normally when people say this, the biggest problem is nearly always, well, do you actually train that body part very often? No, because they think it's rubbish and they don't like it as much. They don't train it, and that's the reason. I saw a great video from Alex Hormozy. You know Alex Hormozy?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so he's normally I follow him for his business stuff, but he was talking about he literally had a girlfriend that when she dumped him, she said that his calves were small, and he wore trousers for 3 years, never ever showed his calves off, and he just started training calves at the start of all of his workouts every single time.
Yeah.
And then one point later on, 3 years later, he just got used to wearing trousers, and he forgot that what happened, and he just got used to just doing the calves at the start of the workout. And then one day he was like, "Oh man, it's getting hot. I should wear some shorts." Like, just not even thinking about it. And then he remembered why he put long trousers on and trained calves at the start of the workout, and they'd actually grown, and now his calves look pretty decent.
And that's it, innit? Like, there's a big psychological effect to your small muscle group, innit? You know what I mean? Like, are they small, or do you just think they're small? And then obviously genetics, innit, and muscle imbalances and all that sort of stuff. Like, I've got an excuse for my genetics because I'm a really powerful individual and I can sprint fast, jump really high, and that's because I have long Achilles tendons. It's like kangaroos have the longest Achilles tendons. That's why they can jump really fucking high and far. I'm not saying I'm a kangaroo, but you know, I have a smaller muscle belly in the gastroc and a long tendon. All right, that longer tendon will build up more energy and produce more like power. So
yeah, we're very much the same there. I was a long jumper, I was a sprinter, I was a winger in rugby. Like, you know, it was very, very similar sort of like genetics, me and you with calves. You know, but I think with me with weak body parts, I think my weak body parts have literally flipped completely. When I first started training, I used to love as sucker for punishment of training legs. I absolutely loved it. And like I used to do like 100 leg extensions to start every workout, and I had like 24, 25-inch quads, but no upper body. And then probably because of training quads and barely any hamstrings, I've got so many issues around the hip and the pelvis and then the spine, which we've spoken about before, that I'm undoing all those bad habits. And in turn, now probably my legs are probably the weakest body part now, and I'm starting to build them back up. But I've always said is that my triceps are definitely the weakest body part, and it's the most noticeable. If you see a picture of my back, my triceps will make my back look smaller rather than my back making my triceps look bigger. You know, and that's the one I always notice. So when it comes to identifying weak body parts first, because some people here might be very obvious. I know exactly what I want help with, but other people might not know. When it comes to yourself or your clients, how would you identify weak body parts for somebody?
Well, the simple one is just like looking at your physique in the mirror, isn't it? Like from a hypertrophy standpoint, yeah, like how you look, right? And that's it. It's subjective though, isn't it? Everyone's gonna want to have bigger biceps or bigger chest or bigger shoulders, and females will want bigger fucking asses or whatever they want. You know what I mean? So subjectively, you have to look at yourself in the mirror and you know, what do you want to work on? You know what I mean? And also, I think a big part of that is why do you want to work on it? Because if you not understand your why you want to work on that muscle group, it will just give you that motivation, that drive to actually apply that, you know, that system, whatever you want to do to, you know, doing it. You know what I mean?
That's such a good point. That's such a good point because, like, we always talk about a why, and everyone talks about a why with fat loss, right? Because there's a big delay in gratification that comes from fat loss efforts, right? You've got to say no to beers with the boys. You've got to say no to the takeout and cook yourself. But the same rules apply with, like, hypertrophy, 100%. In terms of, like, going to those tough places in the set, getting to the gym when you don't want to go, when you're tired. And, like, I know this, like, in my personal training career, right, I've built an all right amount of muscle, but I've never been the biggest guy. And part of that is down to the fact that I have a stronger why when you put 8 weeks on the clock and have a photo shoot. But it's having to delay gratification for 2.5 years to put on a decent amount of muscle is harder. So I think that's a point that probably people aren't thinking about. It's like, I want to grow my arms. Well, cool. Are you going to go in and like not rush your arm session when you're tired and you just want to leave the gym? Are you going to give it the same amount of focus and effort as you did when you came in and did your first exercise of the day? Are there any other ways you identify weaknesses? Because obviously we can look at it by eye, and I think by eye, the point I was going to make a second ago is like, I always think when I look at someone's physique, I'll go, right, if they don't know, some people go, I want the biggest arms in the world. I want to be C.T. Fletcher. And I want the world's biggest arms. And that's cool. We can make you freaky. But a lot of times it's like, I don't know. I just want to look good. So I always go, right, okay, you're only as big as your smallest body part. So I said earlier on at my triceps, because my triceps are small on my back's over dominant, that will bring my whole physique down. So I put 5 kilos on you on everywhere, you look like you've gained 4 or 5 kilos. But if I put 5 kilos on you, put 3 kilos of that on you in my triceps, I'll look like I've gained 8, 9 kilos because the overall balance of the physique's gone up. Yeah. But like, other than because obviously you deal with a lot of strength guys, there's more to weak body parts than just how they look. So like, how do you start to identify weaknesses in people from a strength standpoint or performance standpoint?
Yeah, so just before I get to that, like the other way to look is just to compare the individual to other athletes or individuals. Like, you know what I mean? Ask simple questions. You know what I mean? If someone wants to build arms, like, what is there someone that you like think has a good looking physique? Is this the sort of physique that you would like? And then you as the coach, us as the coaches, we can be honest and say, listen, you don't have this body type, or you can achieve this, or you can't, etc.
That's a caveat before you go into the point there, because I think there's a big caveat to that, and you kind of mentioned it, is making sure that you actually find someone that's believable. I remember when I had an online client once reach out to me, and like he was like he looked like a very tall, skinny Amish fella, big beard, you know, very, very, very narrow frame, and he sent me a picture of Terry Crews. And I'm like, I can't do this for a number of reasons. I can't do this because he was the whitest person I've ever met in my life. There's a lot of things I couldn't do. But that's just why I think if you're a coach out there that has a portfolio of results and the client's not sure what they want to look like, show them your portfolio. Is there anyone in here that you want to look like? And the good thing about that is that if someone says something unrealistic, you're not just going to go, sorry, that's not possible, and burst their bubble and lose buy-in. You can go, cool, if you look at this person's bone structure, if you want to look at the after, you need to look at the before in some way, shape, or form. And when we're looking at this, if it's fat loss, maybe you can, if you love the same structure but you're bigger, you can achieve that but in longer. And that's the expectation layout. But for some people, it's like, okay, you haven't got the same structure. You're not going to look like that when you're lean. However, this person definitely has a similar frame, so you can achieve this. And that can get them excited about a goal now that is realistic. So I think that's a caveat with that. If you're choosing someone out there, start to think, do you look like that person? Are you structured like that person? Otherwise, it's going to be much harder.
Yeah, for sure. So from the question that you asked, from like a strength testing perspective, how do we work on certain muscle groups? There's loads of ways to skin the cat with this, and loads of ways to do it, and everyone will do it a little bit differently. And I may choose a different method for different individuals, for males, for females, for different athletes if they play different types of sports or general pop and the elderly, etc. But also with that, we have to look at the importance and how important it actually is. Like, is it important for their sport or for their job or for their physique? You know what I mean? And again, it's understanding why they want to achieve that, and us being the experts, is it realistic to achieve? Time frame, etc. as well. But yeah, like, you know, it's important that we test, right? If we're not testing, we're guessing, or if we don't assess, then we're guessing. So we need to do some testing. Is the bench press a certain percentage to the rotator cuffs or the chin ups or whatever method you want to use to test? Is there a weak body part? Maybe this weak body part isn't growing because it's weak, and we need to create a stronger musculature and area of joints around that muscle so that we can load heavier tension, heavier loads, produce more force. Maybe that muscle will start to grow. A big problem I always find with skinny people is that they're not building muscle because they're fucking weak. They need to build some muscle tissue. They need to get strong. All right, you need to make them really strong. If they're a male who is not overweight and they can't do fucking 6, 8, 12 chin-ups, they're weak, regardless of what their height to body mass ratio is. You know what I mean? People need to be stronger.
You alluded to sort of structural balance graphs there with, you know, how much is a percentage of your rotator cuff. Like, how, like, for people, firstly, for people that don't know what that is, could you give me a rundown of sort of what it is, how you use it, and how much weight do you put into the results?
Well, I mean, structural balance is a concept that was developed by probably not Charles Poliquin, but it was definitely popularized. Yeah, Charles Poliquin, and it's a body part system that's has percentages to it. So you bench press 1 rep max may be, let's say for talking conversation, to keep it simple, is 100 kilos. That will represent 100%. That will be your 100% lift. Right now, all the other muscle groups will have other lifts: shoulders, shoulder press, rotator cuff work, chin up, pull up, like for your back strength, etc. Now, all of those lifts will have to be at a certain percentage to that bench press. Now, if they're not, then you work on that specific muscle group and you improve it, and you create this structural balance of percentages across those muscle groups. And once you're balanced, then you should have no flaws on your overall athleticism, overall strength ratios, and you should be able to, be a good athlete, a powerful athlete, and potentially you could take that further and say you should be able to build muscle in those correct areas because you have no weaknesses and flaws. Do I use that in my day-to-day practice to build muscle tissue? No. Is it a strategy that could be used in some ways? I think so, yes. If someone is very, very weak on their shoulder press compared to their bench press, then we may not necessarily have to do a structural balance test, but we can, know that in our head that we know that from a structural balance test, if the shoulders are way weaker than the bench press, then we know that we need to increase the bench press. You know what I mean? If you have that education behind the system, then you can then do some sort of testing and then fix it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely makes sense. And I think it's one of those things where, like, I see the validity in structural balance graphs, and I've spent a lot of time working under Tom Hibbert, who's a huge believer in them. And I tell you what, if anyone's taken Charles's stuff and made it way better, no disrespect to Charles, it's Tom, because he just lives and breathes programming, and he lives them. And I'm like, I've always like some of the things like, like the external rotation, 10% of your bench press. And I'm like, get out of here. But I also think as well, like if you can use them in the right context, I think they have a lot of benefits. Yeah. First off, I think you don't use them at the start. People need to build a base layer of strength. Right? You need to. Most people can't even get into the lifts that you're trying to work on. Yeah, so if you can do that, and then if you have something that allows you to go, right, I'm not going to test 1 rep maxes with 90% of people. So how can I give a rough estimate of what my 1 rep max is from a 6 rep max? And that feeds the information into there. And then from that, it's like, here's how I personally use it. And you have way more experience at using this sort of stuff than me. I use it probably after like the first 3 to 4 months of training to help a client, one, understand what we're doing in the next quarter. So it gets them emotionally engaged in the training, right? It allows us to see and have a key thing to work on each quarter. So it helps them with longevity. And how I'll use it is I will see what's the weakest upper body lift and the weakest lower body lift to focus on. I don't always put too much stock in the smaller stuff unless it's really under. And I just use my coaching eye and what I want to bring up from a muscular standpoint in my B's and C's. But it just gives me my starting point to work on. So if someone's weaknesses was an incline press, let's say, and the front squat, I would probably have because I'm having an incline press as my main lift, I probably have my decline lift as my main accessory because of the nice degree principle from kilo strength. And then I'll have a front squat and a squatting pattern focused lower body work. Before you answer that, I do have one question that you might be able to answer for me. Everything nearly always comes off the deadlift, right? So how can the deadlift be the weakness? Is it just if you realise overall it's just a bit rubbish?
Well, think of it this way: like, if you're, how heavy are you?
About 93, 94.
Let's just say you're 90 kilos for mathematical sake. If you're 90 kilos and you can deadlift, let's say you're 90 kilos and you can back squat 1.5 times your body weight. You can deadlift what? So you're 90 kilos means that you can back squat 135. Is that correct? Yeah, you can deadlift. Yeah. So you can squat. If you're 90 kilos, you can back squat comfortably 135 kilos. Yeah, 1.5 times your body weight. That's a good number. Yeah, that's a good number for a normal person. But you can only deadlift 145 kilos. Your deadlift is weak.
Makes sense. Yeah.
So, like, you don't use the deadlift then to, plug numbers and work. The deadlift's weak, right? It's not. Your deadlift should be way higher than that, maybe 15, 25% more. So then your deadlift's weak. Yeah.
Do you use that as a starting point, and then a lot of your strengths just by looking at the athletes? So whether that's videos sent to you by the client or in person, you see, right, they're going to be weak off the chest. It's probably going to be more likely to be chest or delts, depending on their structure. If they're weak at the end, it's probably going to be more about like things that are going to be stabilizing the shoulder, mid back, things like that. Is that how you generally pick weaker lifts after that point?
Yeah. I'd say so. Yeah, I mean, like, like some of the athletes that I work with, like, not all the time. Like, we have certain lifts that we try and prioritize. Like my swimmers, we don't use the bench press. We use, like, I would test their chin up for reps, and I would test their pullover strength for like a 3 to 5 rep max. Believe it or not.
Wow.
Yeah. So and that's not what I invented. That's what they use at the Western Australia Institute of Sport, the highest level of athletic development in Western Australia. So they're using that sort of testing for their swimmers and pole vaulters. And they have the best pole vaulting program in the whole of Australia. They're using these isolation exercises, wow, to test athletes. You'd never believe it, but they use it. So
I think it makes a lot of sense.
It makes sense, but I mean, there's a lot of people that think they know what they're talking about out there, and they would just maybe get them to bench or chin or so. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on behind closed doors that not a lot of people know about, how people are being tested for their sport. So we should never think that's wrong. You know what I mean? If you hear it, you know.
I think that brings me on to a little point about like bringing up weaker body parts. And this is one I hadn't thought about, but generally true, because these are people that are testing think like this. I know other people are thinking like this. I reckon some of the reasons why people have weaker body parts is because they're too focused on compound exercises only and think anything on a machine is bad.
Yeah, quite possibly. Yeah, for sure. I mean, and also to go with that, people aren't structural balance and all this sort of stuff and testing. They're just thinking strength testing. How about like number testing, like the tested volume? You know what I mean? Let's do some. How many reps can you get without weight on a flat dumbbell press? Can you get 8 reps with the 40s? Let's just try and get that up, not just your 2, 3, 5 rep max bench press. You know what I mean? I think that's very important for muscle development. Can we create personal records, personal best through volume? Yeah. That's what I like to do for hypertrophy methods mostly.
Yeah. One of the biggest things I'm like trying to let people in on about if people want to learn more about hypertrophy is the difference between an output based and a skill based lift. So like, I'm not saying squats, deadlifts, overhead presses are bad for hypertrophy, right? Like a lot of people got big off squats, right? If you're built to squats, if you're Tom Platz, squats are a great quad exercise, like no doubt, right? But I would generally think for most people, unless you're a bit weird and throw safety out the window, you've got skill-based lifts in there, which are your compound-based lifts, which are going to be more things you can refine over time as a skill, so it keeps your training engaged. They've got a lot of load capabilities, so they're good for overall strength. But if we know that if hypertrophy is gained within 1 to 5 reps of like muscular failure, how really with those lifts are you going to go that close to muscular failure? You're probably going to go to technical failure at best, right? Which may, depending on how competent you are at these lifts, may delve into like 1 to 2 effective reps, but probably no more. Then you've got your output-based lifts, which are your hack squats and your machine chest presses, and to some extent maybe your more like your dumbbell presses, your isolation lifts, where you can take things really far. You can go to those dark places. You can work really hard. And this is not me saying that I think machine-based exercises are better, right? Like Tom Platz used back squats, Dorian Yates used machines, right? Both monstrous human beings. I think we should use both in the sense of understanding there are limitations in your compound lifts. And if your goal is hypertrophy and your quads are your weak body part, how about get on a hack squat for that? If your goal is to have a better squat and learn the squat and have a skill and just be the strongest guy in your gym, then by all means squat. But I see a lot of people going, I'm going to do a standing overhead press from a seated because that's a progression. Like, progression for what? Progression for stability? Overhead range? Overall strength? Maybe. Progression for hypertrophy? Probably not, because now you've taken away stability.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I agree, man. I used to work with someone who's hard on variation, hard on a certain philosophy of training, and he changes workouts every 3 weeks, and his goal is hypertrophy. I've never seen him build muscle in 10 years. He's changing exercises too much, too often, dabbling like too much in one approach, like exercise variation. And the variation doesn't include, these things that you're talking about. They include going from a barbell behind the neck press to a single arm standing overhead press, going back down into a seated barbell press with no back support, into a push press, barbell push press. Or it's too much variation, and it's too much, and it's not enough like hard, solid output work.
I bet he's got good overhead range though, right?
Probably not.
Rib cages flared, they're terrible all the way through. But no. But yeah, so like when we delve into some of the solutions for this, when people have now understand they've got a weaker body part they want to work on. Before we talk about specific tips, I want to get your thoughts, because I have a view on this. Is having weaker sides normal?
Sorry, repeat that again.
So before we go into like the weaker body parts, people often talk about weaker sides. Oh, my left side's weaker, or my right side's weaker. Is having a weaker side normal?
Oh, certainly, yeah. I mean, everyone's going to have a weaker side. And, like, the goal with training should always also be to try and create a more balanced body from side to side and front to back. But, if you're doing barbell squats and you get to that 1 to 5 rep failure and they're, like, perfectly executed, and then you go on to your step-ups, like, you know how to do that skill very well, and then you go on to your step-ups and your left leg fatigues way faster than your right, there's a problem. And you ain't highlighting that on a squat, you're highlighting it on the step up, and there's something that you need to work on, because most likely over time you're going to get injured, probably squatting. So I mean, for longevity, for minimizing injury and lowering injury risk, then making sure your balance is a good idea.
So John Shallow quite said is, if you can't stand on one leg, you have no business loading on two, which I kind of agree to agree. But I also think there's a middle ground with this sort of stuff, right? Like it's setting your expectations so you're not trying to fight on something that isn't actually that important, and also like seeing what you can do. It's like the old mechanics argument of like, we don't have an X-ray, right? We don't know for certain if a lack of overhead range is I need mobility and strength somewhere, or my spine is shaped like this. Now, all you can do is try and work to get that closer. And if it does, great. But you find exercises that allow you to work around it too. And so you're not wasting time on something that, unless you go and get a full X-ray at a university science lab, you're never going to find. I think weaker sides is this thing as well. It's like some people go, well, I want to make sure my left is exactly the right. When people actually don't think about that, we're not designed symmetrical. Our diaphragm is bigger on the right-hand side because it's got to go over the liver, which means the ability to expand the rib cage on one side is different. Your brain is different. So there's more motor neurons on the left side of the brain, which controls the right side of the body. So there's more coordination on the right, which might mean the left might be stronger to adapt to the coordination difference. So it's like, do you want to try and get as close to perfect as possible? Yes. But if your idea of a weaker body part is I'm slightly weaker on left to right, you might not ever get rid of that.
Yeah. I think like if you're within 10%, you're all good, I'd say.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
So when it comes to tips of bringing weaker body parts up, we'll go take it in turns. What was your number one tip for someone to bring up a weaker body part?
I mean, one effective approach is to increase the volume of training on that lagging muscle group. Quite simple. Yep. Add more work.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think when it comes to sort of like, we said at the start, right, make it a priority. If you train something only once a week and doing a bro split and you're wondering why your chest isn't growing, maybe try doing chest twice a week. You bring your overall volume up. You're probably getting close to your maximum adaptable volume. Yes. I think my one on that is they're improving your execution.
Yeah.
Most people, they don't know how to engage the tissue. They're just doing presses because presses are the thing, and not thinking, well, is my rib cage angle actually making up my bench press? Is my bench press actually getting my chest? Is there a better exercise for this? Can I use my chest well, even on any exercise? And if you can't do that, it's going to be very hard to make anything grow. I could do bench press 7 times a week, but if it's just going to my delts and my triceps, for whatever reason, structural or execution, then I'm just going to get bigger delts and triceps and have even more of an imbalance.
Yeah, I would definitely put that above my approach, like, exercise technique and exercise execution, exercise setup. That has to be number one. You know what I mean? And then most likely, I would probably say then increase the volume, and that could be done through sets, reps, exercise, adding an exercise, or like you said, adding that extra day and increasing your frequency.
Yeah, exactly. I always think when I do a hypertrophy block, I start with like what is the minimum effective volume for every muscle group and work up in sets over the course of the week. I may add a little bit more frequency to the specific target areas that I want, and then just see where that what's the max amount of volume they can handle, and then I just back off 10%, run that for a while, and then when I go to a new phase, I drop it back down to minimum effective volume, essentially act as a deload and work up from there.
Cool.
So the one I had next was positional tips. So, like, can you actually get into position to target the muscle you're looking to train? I think this is a big one. And this is a big one for a lot of people who are desk bound, and a lot what I've battled with in my life is that, let's say, for sake of argument, I wanted to. I know this is more strength related, but I want to get into my lower traps. If that's where my range ended, that I'm not getting into my lower traps. I need to get into there, right? So if I can get into overhead position, I can line things up with my lower traps. Lats is another good one, right? Can I actually get into a position to lengthen my lats very well, or get in a position to engage my chest in its lengthened position? We know that hypertrophy comes in a more lengthened range. A lot of people haven't got the structural integrity at this moment in time to get into those positions to actually work those muscles effectively.
Yeah, that's a great point. A lot of people, that's where, a lot of people, they think exercises are meant to be done in a particular way. Like, they can be done in very, very many different ways to target the muscle, depending on your anthropometrics and injuries and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I think that's a massive one. Make sure you get into the right positions. Yeah,
that's why, like, we talk about structural balance assessment. This is why this is useful, and this is why going into sort of GPP and SPP phases is good, because if you're periodizing over a block, maybe my first 4 to 6 weeks is maybe my indicator lift is a pullover because I'm now trying to improve shoulder range of motion. Maybe I have loads of pause in my presses. Maybe I go into a lot of split squats, unilateral work. And then when I come into a more traditional hypertrophy block, it's going to be more effective than I started with that in the first place. Like 6 weeks of that and 6 weeks of hypertrophy might actually trump 12 weeks of hypertrophy if we can't get into the positions effectively.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. I would, my next one was, again, like thinking you're thinking of like from a coaching perspective. I'm thinking of more like a sciencey perspective. My other strategy was to think about progressive overload more, so that you can increase the stress upon the muscle. So simply, like we said earlier, like focus on getting really strong on that exercise, whether that's for load or for hypertrophy, even better for the amount of reps you can do at that same weight. So can you start making some number PRs? Yeah. So really focusing on getting strong on those lifts.
I like that, and I also like the fact that I think that's more important when it comes to your smaller muscle groups, because like I think right now, right, even if some people are great at taking logbooks, some people are terrible at them, right? But if I go in and not taking a logbook for a phase, I could probably work out what I lifted for dumbbell press, and I could probably get a progressive overload just by proxy. Or if I'm taking a logbook, I'm taking a logbook on my pressing and my squatting and my all my big lifts. But if any time where I logbook, people just get lazy with it, it's probably biceps, it's probably triceps, it's probably abs, it's probably calves. All these muscles are probably the ones that a lot of people want to grow, are the ones where they sort of just go in and just get a pump. And they stopped actually looking to create a progressive overload. So I think that's a really valuable point.
Well, like if I think about like my training history, like when I was at my strongest, like when I was deadlifting like 250. Yeah, deadlifting 250. Great technique, good form, like comfortable 230. Yeah. And I was squatting like 150 for 10. My legs were big, man. My legs were big because I was really strong. For me, like I was strong for me. But at the same time, when I was at my somewhat weakest, I wasn't squatting. I couldn't squat 140 kilos, but I could do a ton of hack squats for reps. I was also at my legs was big and solid as well. So there's both sides of that coin there. You know, I was really strong. My legs were big and solid, and then I was over here. I was a lot weaker, but I was really good for reps at that moderate to high end, and my legs were still really big and solid. Now I'm doing Olympic weightlifting, and I don't go any more than 3 reps. I've lost a lot of size and I've lost a lot of weight.
Do you think that's a good argument for undulating periodization, where you do like a phase of your heavy back squat stuff and get strong at that, and then you get a phase where it is a little bit more hack squats for reps, or you're combining the two in some way, where you sort of bring both of those things together, where that squat will allow you to get used to handling a lot of load. It will work on getting you into a better range of motion and strong at bigger range of motion, and look at all of, I hate the term stabilize the muscles because it's so generic, but stuff that's going to be also needs to be strong to get you into these big positions in a squat. And then going into sort of like your higher volume work, which is still heavy, but it's more stable. So you go to muscular failure more in one phase and then technical failure more in the other. It could be the same workout, or in an undulating model where you do it block to block, but combining the two is essentially what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think it's a good way to train. I mean, if you leave it too long, some people say that, you know, you don't use those gains that you made and you lose them after 3 weeks. I mean, like, the way it works is if you get really strong and say like at the bench press, you should be able to maintain that for about 30 days, that high end strength.
Okay.
Power, speed, power, velocity, you can lose it in a day. Yeah, like if you don't train explosive and powerful, you definitely lose it in 5 to 7 days. You know, that top end power, you lose it fast. So like, you know, depending on your genetics, your qualities that you have, your muscle fiber makeup, and like your abilities to produce power or heavy lifts or reps, your genetics. I mean, you know, like if you think about rep work and being able to do rep work and buffer lactate well, it's very, very genetically, what's the word? Like, you know, there's a big genetic component to being able to do that sort of work, you know, and that's just the facts. You know, females can tolerate it better and certain individuals can tolerate it better. I've never been able to tolerate it well. If I train it, I can tolerate it well, but I'm not good at it.
Yeah.
So you've got to train to your, you know, what you're made to be, you know.
Is that why a lot of strength coaches? Is that why a lot of strength coaches program through? Like, I always thought, like, when you look at like old school bodybuilding hypertrophy coaches, they tend to do a lot of longer phases because it's like you're just kind of getting good at something and you want to keep a progressive overload, so you want to keep getting stronger. But is that why people, like, I'm going to use Stefan Casalt as an example here, would program 3-week phases? So he minimizes that loss in strength by the time he comes back to strength. Is that why his phases would be so short, for what you're saying?
It could, excuse me, it could be, yeah. I mean, I don't know, like yeah, it could be, yeah. Like, yeah, I'm not sure, man. I don't know, like, yeah, probably. I mean, yeah, I mean, yeah, maybe, I'm not sure. Yeah, you have to ask him.
Is there any other things that you would do to improve someone's, out of the things we just mentioned, to improve someone with a weaker body part? I think we've covered most of the basics.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I'd say they're the basics. Yeah, and like, yeah, I'd say the last one is you could change the type of exercise you're using. It's a good one. You know what I mean? Like, instead of doing leg presses, do some hack squats. You know what I mean? Just get a slight little subtle variation. You can go from leg press to banded leg presses, or, you know, just have a slight tweak, or go from barbell squats to barbell squats with chains. So you can vary the exercise, vary the implement with the exercise and things like that. I think that's a good strategy, and it keeps things fun and interesting. I don't like to use the word toys anymore for weightlifting chains or band, accommodating resistance or variable resistance or these sort of things, because I think it gives it a bad name and an idea in people's heads, because these toys that I'm talking about still need to be put into your program expertly and done properly.
They're not just there to play with. They're not just there to play with one day.
No, they're not. Whether that's advanced variable resistance like bands and chains, or whether it's simple things like using fat grips and fat bars. They should be intelligently put into your program by an expert like us. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I'll piggyback on that one before I give one more. I think when we're looking at training a muscle, we want to train it through its full range, right? Full contractile range. And I think a lot of people get into the exercise they like. I want to grow my triceps. I'm going to do push downs because I really like push downs. Whereas anything, are you actually doing anything that's going to really load the mid range? You know, like lying tricep tensions, close grip bench presses, dips. Are we doing anything that's going to change the length range? Anything overhead? And what I often like to do, and I'm using this as arms for an example, is if most muscle groups, when we're looking at looking at strength profiles, is most people are strong in the mid range, right? Weak at the extremities. So if I get someone strong at the length and range in phase one, this maybe is something that will elicit probably the most hypertrophy, and often will probably have a good crossover in certain exercises to being able to have get into better ranges of motion. Let's say an incline bicep curl. Then in phase two, I'll do something at the shortened range. So now I'll do, let's say, a preacher curl. And then I've got the two extremities a little bit stronger, which means now in that final phase, I want to really load up and stick as much volume as I can. I can go into the mid-range, and they're even stronger than it would have been if I started that way. And that way, as we get those variations that are working to, over the course of a block, you know, or like a quarter, a training block, to actually try to work with your strength capabilities and add variations that complement each other, rather than just throwing variation in for variation's sake.
All right. Well, let me play devil's advocate on that. So, if you wanted to bring up the quads, so in the first block of training, what exercise would you then use to build that quad in its lengthened position for
go on.
Intermediate level individual?
So with an intermediate people, I probably would be doing more exercise frequency because they could probably handle a little more volume in general. So I would definitely have a split squat in there, and that would work well from a unilateral perspective, just to get it going back to the structural balance thing we came into. If they can handle more, I might throw a sissy squat in there as well. And then I would probably go into, I would probably still with the quads, because you're not really getting that much from just a pure leg extension on its own. I'd probably still have some form of mid-range challenge in the second phase, but I would throw in a leg extension and then just absolutely load them up on a hat squat or a back squat in phase three.
Yeah, cool.
But I certainly do that more with single joint exercises, stuff that has got long-term strength potential. It's not like I can stick them on a squat in phase one and load them for 12 weeks. I'm going to hit a wall with biceps, right? Yeah. I think my last one to close off is also like I'm much a big fan of understanding systems and having rules for program design, but there was a time and a place to break the rules. And I think 90% of the time, most people's weaker body parts, maybe you're the exception, having chest is yours, but most people's weaker body parts is the stuff that comes at the end of their workouts. So flip the switch. Like Alex or Mosley training calves at the start. Train arms at the start of your leg session. That's not going to interfere with your upper body sessions. Flip the switch and do them when you're fresh and ready to go, and see the difference than trying to do it when you're tired, thinking about when you're going to leave, trying to beat the traffic, and see how quickly they grow.
Yeah, I agree. It's priorities, isn't it? And like, lastly from me, like, you got to be patient and consistent. Like, bringing up leg and body parts does take time and consistent effort. Like, you may not see results in a few weeks, but you know, like it's you know, like it will take time, you know, and you've got to be consistent and work really hard, and eat properly and rest hard, you know. So
yeah, and that's a great way to close. Making sure you're eating enough to actually grow. Don't try and do this on a deficit.
Yeah.
So
plan, be consistent, measure, and assess.
Awesome. So, as we said at the start of this about your content being really, really good, and you're going to be doing more of it, and you may potentially even looking at a one-day event near you. Tell us a little bit about where to find you. Where can people hear all about the stuff you've got coming up?
So, just on the socials, man, like Stephen Collins Training. If you want to stay up to date with daily posts on training tips, exercise tips, nutritional tips, I've been going hard on it. So, follow me there and see what I'm doing. Follow the journey, because I'm trying to push this a little bit harder now, seeing as that I might as well. So I've got some stuff to share with you all. I hope you find value in it. And then I do weekly emails as well. You can sign up through my website as well if you want that, stephencollinstraining.com. And my event I'm going to be putting on is how to optimize your weight training. So it's for anyone from beginner to advanced, from general pop to advanced athlete or strength and conditioning coach. We're going to go over a couple of things, simple things, complex things. And we're going to cover a couple of things maybe over 3-4 hours, and just get stuck into exercise execution and that sort of stuff. It should be a fun event.
Love it. Love it. I wish I was in Perth for it. But man, thanks again. It's good to get back into these, and I'll chat to you soon.
See you later, bro.
Hey guys, thank you very much for watching the podcast. If you're like me and like to binge watch podcast episodes, click here for our most recent episode. And if you enjoy the show and want to be updated when new videos come live, click here to subscribe to the channel.